Welcome, everyone. We're thrilled to welcome Dawn Hicks back, albeit virtually, to the SoA. Any way we can have you back, and to share her work with us as part of the 50th anniversary colloquium series, as we're re-engaging with pioneering and innovative alumni in their careers. And so I will hand it off to Peter.
Great. Well, welcome everybody, and I'm sure people will continue to kind of join in as we start up here. I'd like to welcome back to the SoA Dawn Hicks. Dawn is a graduate of our MArch-1 degree program. She is currently a project manager at the Venice Community Housing Corporation, where she is a key member of the housing development learning team that creates, promotes, and engages collaborative design strategies with communities. Such efforts engage a participatory set of design methods that result in real-world benefits for those in the process. She is an officer and current treasurer of the Southern California chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects, and is on the advisory board of the Department of Civil, Architectural, and Environmental Engineering at North Carolina A&T State University. Since her graduation from UNC Charlotte in 2010, Dawn has been active with organizations dedicated to designing urban environments through the social, economic, and cultural forces in play, and has helped to shape those environments and communities in inclusive and affordable ways. From 2018 to 2020, she worked as an Enterprise Rose Fellow with Venice Community Housing in Southern California, as a community design coordinator, where her expertise with participatory design and community engagement techniques has had lasting effect. With VCH, Dawn worked to facilitate dynamic engagement for the purposes of co-creating design and development with residents that she's worked with. After this fellowship, Dawn accepted a project manager role and position with VCH, and currently manages projects from acquisition, rehabilitations, and new construction to partnerships with community land trusts working to preserve affordability in Los Angeles and the surrounding counties. Originally a design professional from Richmond, Virginia, Dawn holds a Bachelor of Science in Architectural Engineering from North Carolina A&T. Her Master's of Architecture degree at UNC Charlotte focused on the social and economic impacts of hip hop on space and its implications on culturally significant habitats. I had the opportunity of working along with Eric Sauda, Greg Snyder, and Christina Luce to be an advisor on Dawn's thesis during her time here at the SoA. Her project was ambitious as she addressed hip hop culture from a design perspective. And in her research, she analyzed and made graphic the spatial implications of emceeing, DJing, b-boy choreography, spatial ciphers, and other activities embedded in hip hop culture. I think her work is particularly cogent today, given the focus on minority politics, spatial occupation, and the built conditions and possibilities that such close readings and research may have on design and architectural production. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Dawn.
Thanks, Peter. That was great. I think you did my whole presentation in that introduction. I think we're done. We can,
No.
We can stop
you
now.
have a lot to add.
That was great. Thank you. It's an honor to, you can start sharing the screen if you want to.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen, and she's and she's going to tell me which slides to go to. So
Okay. I am really honored that you all asked me to come back and talk about my work. My path in architecture has been diverse and untraditional. And so for me to be able to work now in the things that I talked about in grad school is amazing to me. And so I'm just gonna go through, my process and where I came from and what I worked on in grad school and how it got me to the fellowship and how it got me to the work that I'm doing now. So that's what, my slides are about. And I'm used to, this is an intimate group. I'm used to talking to large groups, small groups. And so this is very informal. If you have a question, please feel free to stop me and ask a question. So I don't want you all to feel like we're going to be family in here for the next 30 minutes. So feel free to, to engage. That's what my work has been about and is engaging. So I don't want this just to be me just talking to you all. So please feel free to chime in, to interrupt, to ask questions. And yeah, we'll get started. So Peter, you can go to the next slide. It's really funny because I showed this slide to a group of architects and they like freaked out. Peter knows me by now that I don't like white space. So I always like to push the boundaries of how I can incorporate images without showing any white space on the page. So, but Peter has already talked a lot about this background, and this is just about, who I am. I gave a talk last year about using those words in the faded yellow of I am, and I love this quote about, I am, two of the most powerful words, for what you put after them shapes your reality. And everything that I've experienced has, shaped who I am. And these are just a few images of that. Peter mentioned I'm the current SoCal NOMA treasurer, rounding out a 4-year term. I'll be out the end of this year. I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, where I've done a lot of community work. And again, current project manager for Venice Community Housing. And going back to my younger years, I'm a first generation college graduate from North Carolina A&T with my AE degree. And then, of course, went on to get my master's at UNC Charlotte. And I'm from Richmond, Virginia, and Richmond is where I, kind of started this research and wanting a better understanding of community. Richmond is really deeply rooted in being the capital of the Confederacy and having these Confederate monuments and community and segregation through things like redlining and highway separation is the center of a lot of congregated housing, public housing. And so this is where I started and where I discovered my love for hip hop. That mixtape in the middle is what I used to do in middle school. Used to make mixtapes from songs off the radio. And so all of this has shaped my interest in understanding, the effects of colonization has had in Richmond and still has in some ways in architecture and in the Black community as a whole. And started thinking about how architecture and design can start to change these common historical narratives that happen in a lot of BIPOC communities across the United States. And so Richmond motivated me to think more about community engagement, community-led design, and ultimately leading me to my graduate thesis. And in the next slide, Peter, this is where I started at UNC Charlotte. This is education and hip hop. And in the next slide, it shows, my journey through UNC Charlotte. So this is what architecture looked like for me. I'm sure if there were students on, they will recognize that first image of, my space, shared space in our last year of grad school. We kind of wherever we laid our stuff, that's where we were. And it was really about community and helping each other get through these years of grad school. And I did study abroad with Peter. I helped to in China, and I helped to reestablish the Nomash chapter there when I was there. And I began to, start digging deeper into who I was as a Black architect. This helped me to better understand how I wanted to see the world through architecture. And I began to digging deep into African architecture and in areas like the Dogon tribes, and how that architecture and creating front porches defines public versus private spaces, and how that is reflected in American architecture, and how these communities can blur the two, public and private, through social interactions. And I studied these spaces like Pruitt-Igoe and Cabrini Green, and the theory behind, housing projects, and how these deplorable conditions started to birth hip hop in New York. And so the images on the bottom are that I looked at Charlotte neighborhoods and how architecture in some form was creating displacement. And I wanted my thesis to talk about how I can take cultural identities in these existing communities and better understand how they already exist in their space, and how we can use strategies to create new spaces and combat these issues of gentrification and displacement. And at the end of it, I even received a few awards for it. So that was exciting to be so different from the rest of my, my class, and to be recognized for being different. So that was exciting, and I'm still think about that to this day, even though it was 11 years ago. And next slide, Peter. So I just am going to go through the things, because this will help kind of shape what I'm working on now. Just want to kind of go through what I worked on my thesis. And this is when I first started thinking about these things. I wasn't really sure where I was going to go with all the research that I had done on African architecture and effects on American architecture in the Black community. And but I was thinking of that and the effects of gentrification again. And so I started to think deeper into this relationship between music and architecture. So just to go through this a little quickly, I found out in my research that architects were talking about music and space. Henry Lefebvre wrote about socially produced spaces and how they're created. So I thought to myself, well, why can't I use hip hop in the same way? And I can. So I did. And so I use what are called hip hop Cyphers to create these mapping strategies. And I took this cultural identity, of the of a Black community, and I talked about how socially people who participate in this activity work together to create space. And I identified the participants shown in this diagram and started studying their movements and come up with these mapping strategies. And the interesting thing about these diagrams, like I couldn't ever find images of people from above. So I took my own images. It was so cool that my classmates were willing to participate, and they got out there and posed for me, and we took pictures. And so these are actually my classmates in in these diagrams, which was pretty awesome. Again, this whole idea of community and coming together to help implement this strategy. So in the next slide, these mapping strategies became ways for me to study the participants, their ins and outs around the cipher. As Peter mentioned, there are 4 elements: DJing, b-boying, MCing, and graffiti art. And I looked at YouTube videos of all of these things. I went to actual ciphers, and I studied how people interacted within these spaces and how they, occupied these spaces. And so at the end, I just chose b-boying because it's just too many to do research on, and I chose that one to move forward with. So that's what this board shows, you know, the video I watched, the length of time I watched, and who participated. And then in the next slide, I won't go too much deeper in this. I wish I had better scans on my boards, but just wanted to show this idea of the diagrams and the mapping strategies. It was very particular, super intense. But, you know, at the end of the day, it was about me understanding how people move within an existing atmosphere and how they can create their own spaces within this atmosphere. And then the next slide, I told Peter I was going to put this in there. This is an ode to Peter. And that book I still actually have, it's literally still sitting on my TV stand or my coffee table, wherever I move to. It's always there, and a good reminder of my relationship with Peter in this thesis journey was great. To this day, I still don't think I completely understand why Peter wanted me to disassemble this turntable. He always has these grand ideas that I half understand sometimes. That's how my brain works in architecture. But what it did for me was it helped me to relax my mind and to get out of my own head about how different my thesis was from everyone else. And it helped me to finish because I was more at ease about how I was disassembling and I was mixing up the traditional thinking of architecture. So this turntable represents my entire process of, you know, my thesis and how I was taking apart these ideas of architecture and was not going to put it all back together, but at the end, know that it can be put back together in different ways. So next slide. So at the end of this, my next steps were about how to implement this strategy. And although this was a theory, I did a short study of how this could be implemented into a Starbucks. And again, won't dive deeper, but if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me. I studied how to implement this strategy into a Starbucks. And I chose a Starbucks because the Starbucks is like the most gentrified thinking in a neighborhood, because as soon as you see a Starbucks, you know major change is coming, and not always in a good way. This happens all across the United States, that developers or people feel like that Starbucks is like the ultimate, you know, like goal of a neighborhood is to have a Starbucks. So I looked at one in Charlotte and I looked at one in Harlem, New York. And the takeaway, this may be a little hard for you all to see, but was this top image. And there was this stark contrast between who was sitting on the inside of the Starbucks and who was standing on the outside of the Starbucks, right? This was unnerving to me because the only Black people that were inside the Starbucks was myself and my friends, two of my friends. And this is supposed to be something that is implemented into a neighborhood that neighborhood people are supposed to be using. But everyone Black was standing outside of that Starbucks. And this image that I literally just collaged together showed that from me taking images from the inside, me taking images from the outside. And so that kind of triggered in my mind, you know, talking about displacement and the effects that gentrification can have in taking away these cultural identities of these BIPOC communities. And so how can I use what I have done in research to combat these issues, to develop without displacement? Because for me, creating these mapping strategies helped me to understand, you know, architecture should extend beyond the drawing board and into communities. And that's what I got from this was I identified a cultural identity of a community, researched how people use this identity to create space from the corner to the sidewalk to the front porch, all an extension of how we connect to our neighbors and the rest of the community. Next slide. So that's just a background of how I got to where I am. My route to where I am is was a little tricky. After grad school, I couldn't find a job. So I moved back to Richmond, worked as an accountant for a few years, and then found my way back to architecture through government work, and working in the school system in construction and maintenance. Was doing community work on the side, but something for me, the part of my research was still missing. And so I found the Rose Fellowship, and you can go to the next slide. And this is where it began for me, actually from my first year. So it shows first year, second year, and third year cohorts in that image. And this one is just, a quote from the founder. And the image on the left is a book that Katie Swenson, who worked for Enterprise for a long time, she's actually now a partner with Mass Group in Boston. She went around to all the fellows and wrote this book about how fellows are affecting their work is affecting the communities that they reside in and that they work in. The next slide shows just a little background about how the fellowship works, just in case anyone is interested. A host organization, a CDC developer applies for a fellow to host a fellow, and then a fellow applies to be a part of the a part of that organization. In the next slide, this again, this is just what I mentioned previously. Host organizations join the Rose Fellowship in order to incorporate design into their portfolios, and Rose Fellows bring their design experience and community-based knowledge to these CDCs, and that's how the partnership works. And this image is my cohort, who I graduated with, one from Atlanta, one in New York, and one in Minneapolis. In the next slide, this is just, so, this is a professional fellowship. There are licensed architects who apply, they're LEED certified, and this just shows where the fellows, this is a little outdated, but this just shows where fellows end up. They end up community development, like after the fellowship, back in design firms. They teach, start their own firm. So this is just to show how diverse the fellowship is and how it works. And some hosts, some fellows stay with their organization, which is what I did. And so a lot go on to do many other great things. And then the next image just shows the map of where, this is 2 years old, so it's a little updated now, but this is where all the fellows have been or currently are. And it just shows that this work is being done all across the United States. And so in the next slide, I specifically applied to work at Venice Community Housing. There was a fellowship in Atlanta, but I felt like me moving to California would help push my boundaries, even though I had this outstanding thesis research. I still, was in this little bubble in the architecture world. And so I wanted to push myself to do more community work. And so I became a Rose Fellow in the next slide, and I've been able to put these ideas to work all in creative ways. I'm working as a developer. So again, not a traditional architecture or architect's role, but again, creating my own lane and understanding, my work may not be actually designed, but about community planning and participatory design to build equitable communities in the LA neighborhoods and, wherever I end up after I moved to LA. And so the fellowship brought me to VCH. VCH is a nonprofit affordable housing developer that has been doing this work for over 30 years, over 240 units of affordable and supportive housing in the west side of LA. And we have 4 new projects in the pipeline, 4 new developments that will double that portfolio number, which is pretty amazing. And my work as a fellow and me coming in to start the housing development department is a good indication of how we have grown the past 3 years, almost 4 years now that I've been with VCH. And We're working to combat this homelessness issue in LA. Currently, there are over 66,000 people homeless just in the city of LA, which is literally like a small town. And so when I came to VCH, there was no housing development department. And so my role as a fellow is to help build that work in new construction and to be able to help to get folks off the street. And so this is just the image of who we are, one of our developments. And on the right is an image of the work that we want to do in supporting housing for unhoused people, whether it's bridge housing, supportive housing, affordable housing. We need to understand that this is an issue and we're working to get folks off the street. And in the next image, this is where my work started, right? So Venice, I don't know how it is in North Carolina, but Venice and LA is super difficult to develop in. We have to go through planning hearings and neighborhood councils and so many avenues just to get our project approved. And so my work started with community engagement, figuring out how to bring the community in and fight against what we call NIMBYs. I don't know if you all have ever heard of that acronym, but it's not in my backyard. These are folks who want to say they want to get people off the street, but they don't want it to be next to them. And so this is, my work started with, how do I engage the community, get them involved and help them understand that they are being seen and they are being heard. So leading these community meetings, we asked, my role also is to be the liaison between the architects we hire and our organization in order to also push our architects to come in and do community work. And so these images show at the top our community meetings where the architects came in and they spoke with the community about their design and what they wanted to see in a project. The image on the top right is me doing a talk at Google. So we want to be able to spread this knowledge of what we're working on to even to people like Google and Snapchat. All of these things are located in Venice and they have people who are literally living outside on the sidewalk of their office space. We need them to do more. And so that's what that talk was about. And this bottom image I use a lot because it's really powerful. This was a neighborhood council meeting and there were a lot of NIMBYs who had a lot to say and were going to come out to this meeting and try to stop our project. And it was a mess. So we got to organizing, we did community events. We talked to the community about their concerns. We got into the neighborhood. And when it was time for this meeting, we asked people to come together, meet us outside. We passed out t-shirts and we gave out roses because this project is called Rose Apartments. And we talked to people, we met them at the door. And it ended up that most everybody in this image had on our shirts and were our supporters, and we outnumbered the NIMBYs, the opposition. We had over 100 people to speak in our favor, and ended up the neighborhood council, who we thought was going to deny the project, ended up unanimously voting for us to move forward with this 100% affordable housing development that's going to be 35 units and almost done. And I'll show some images at the end of this. So again, my work is about community voices, community-led design. And in the next slide, again, so this is just images of the events that we have where I continue to do Cyphers. There's a mandala at the bottom. This is a chalk art festival. Artists started this, started the outline of this, and then the community came in and finished it. So that's not the finished photo, but the community came in and participated in individual sections of this mandala. And so it was about engage in the community, but also giving them an opportunity to talk to us about what they wanted to see in the development. So having these conversations about design without people even really knowing that they're talking about, design and architecture and the built environment is just about them experiencing the space, being present and seen and heard, and in this built environment, and how we can create and continue to grow off of that that idea. So in the next slide, yes. So again, community-led design. So we started with community engagement and gathering. I talked previously about our architects getting involved. And so the next part of my work was to do community-led design. And so I started doing what are called design ciphers. And you can go to the next slide, Peter. And this goes back again to my research and my thesis about how to create this circular formation or some dynamic shape to get people to talk about design without them even know that they're doing it. And we have done this with our tenants, with our staff, community leaders and members, our board members. And these images are from a board retreat. Staff can be a part of the board retreat. And so I came in and did a cipher for 2 of our projects. And what I did was put them in this circular formation, gave them stickies. And I asked them to write 3 words of what community means to them, 1 word per sticky. And the things that they came up with were amazing. And one at a time, they entered the circle to say what they wrote, and we began to find these commonalities of answers. So this goes back to the research, right, that I did in grad school about ciphers and the participants and how they interact in and out of the circle, how they interact with the folks around the circle. And it kept going like this for 30 minutes. And the participants went in and out, put their stickies on the floor. And at the end of it, the common themes we took and placed them on larger stickies on the wall and started to take a deeper dive into what that theme looks like when you incorporate it into design. And the next image is just we took a deeper dive. This is just an image of taking a deeper dive in a different setting on a different project. This is an organization, Safe Place for Youth. They're actually going to occupy one of our, the ground floor of one of our buildings. And so we wanted to talk to them about how they want to occupy that space. And so this, again, is another cipher of them thinking about their current space and existing and what they wanted to see in the future. And then the next slide, the other thing I talked about was the cultural identities. And this is another way, again, for me to involve the community, and that's taking what already exists in the space and trying to create new. And Venice has this rich arts history that I had no idea about, but it goes back, artists on the boardwalk, and it involves even a lot of unhoused folks who live on the boardwalk, but have this talent of art and design. And so I was tasked with, coming up with this way, another way to engage the community. And I did that by creating Artsy Squared, or Arts Community Collective with VCH. And this was so I could take the rich history of Venice and use that in bridging this gap between art and architecture and the built environment. So what we started to do was engage artists, local artists. We had a whole RFP design process, we interviewed about 20 people and decided on 4. And they came in our existing buildings and they implemented murals on our existing buildings. And these are some images of that work. And they all had different ideas. And the idea was, again, these are existing buildings. So we have tenants that live in these buildings. The tenants participated. We had a tenant liaison role where There was a tenant who was the liaison between the artists and the tenants who live in that building. We wanted to experience, we wanted low-income artists to also have an experience with this process. And so we hired low-income artists to be the main artist's assistant. And so this whole process was about, again, creating community and how we can take the folks in the community and use them to implement art and architecture in existing spaces. So this is two of them. In the next slides, you'll see a few more. Again, these are all existing buildings. The artists came in and talked to the tenants. We had whole design charrettes about what they wanted to see and their different ideas. And so these are just a couple of images of one other building. And then in the next slide is some more. This is two other buildings. One building at the top did 2 murals, and then the second building at the bottom did 2 murals as well. Next slide. And so this was an image of one of the mural reveals. And I like to use this image too, because this is, again, the definition of community. These are the folks who helped us implement the art. The artist is in this picture to the right. These are the folks who live in this building. These are the folks who work with VCH. And actually, to my right, the smaller, tiny woman, Jatan, yep, right there. She's on the mural and she's in her 90s. She serves on our board. She actually just got off a few years ago, but the definition of how we are working to involve the community, to involve BIPOC population, to make sure that this community is being heard in Venice. One thing I forgot to mention is that Venice also has a rich history of people of color being displaced. There's a section in Venice where Black people were only allowed to live in this area. And now none of these people can't even afford to live there. Venice is really expensive, multi-million-dollar homes. And so this work is helping us to figure out how to bring those people back to the spaces where they are from and should be living. Next slide. So this is just an image I use of fellows. We have a youth build program, again, just to show community and who we involve in the work that we do. Our youth build program is for teens, well, young adults ages 18 to 24 who experience homelessness, who want to get high school degrees, who want to get a trade in construction. So I've talked to a lot of them about the work that they have done, but this is a population of age group that I didn't even realize when they are age out of foster care, they have nowhere to go. So most of them end up on the street. And so we have a program where we engage with them, and also our new development will serve this population. Next image. So the end results, right? All of this that I've talked about, what does it look like in architecture? So in the next slide, this is what it looks like. So everything that I've talked about, the work that I've done has been implemented in this design. We work with Brooks and Scarpa. Angie Brooks is my mentor, and we talk a lot about the work that I've done and me pushing them to think about these things about community, involving the community, them coming in early. They've come to our hearings and spoke. They actually live in Venice, so they have a stake in this project. But my role in engaging them and being the liaison between the architects and the developer continues to grow because of the work that they've done. And this is the project where I came in. This was on paper. And this is where I started. This is Rose Apartments. It will be 35 units, 100% affordable, half for the transition age youth that I mentioned, and half for chronically homeless individuals, and one manager's unit. And our offices will go back on the ground floor. We work here, we own these two lots, and then we'll move back into this, and hopefully at the top of the year. And then the next images shows some ladder construction photos, and it's almost done. We're almost there, and we're excited. This is the first ground up project in Venice in over 20 years, which is insane. And so a lot of eyes were on this, and this is why we had to do so much community work, so much boots on the ground work, and engaging to be able to get this project through. And in the next photo, the next few photos just show some things that I'm working on. This is my project, Marion Place is what we call it. It's named after the street it's on. This is an existing site that have some really nice, and I should have put an image of the bungalows in there, really nice Venice style bungalows. And we're rehabbing this project. And we're also adding an ADU, which is the bottom left-hand corner. LA has passed this ordinance where a lot of folks are now utilizing the ability to add accessory dwelling units to their sites. And so we will be doing that on this site of Marion Place, and housing. This will be 9 units of supportive housing. And the next slide is we're working with Eric Owen Moss's office on, if you think back to the image of the Chalk Art Festival where the We Are All Venice sign was, this is the site of this development, and it'll be 144 units. It'll be the largest we've ever done. And it's at the start of the canals in Venice. I don't know if you all have ever been to Venice, California, but there's a section where there are actual canals that people live on. And we will, right now, this is just an existing parking lot. And so we're working with them. This will be live work spaces, studios for artists. This will be our first time implementing those type of spaces in our buildings. It'll have a community room and a whole art studio. And the next image just shows those live work spaces for the studios. And I think the next image is just, I think one more. Yeah, so this is the safe place for youth who I mentioned before, who's gonna occupy one of our buildings. This is the building that their offices will go back on the ground floor. And we're working with the Architect Studio 111 on this one. And I think that's the last one, Peter. Yeah. So I also like to show this image, this shirt that I like to wear. It really comes down to me finding my own way. As I mentioned, before, traditional architecture has not been my route. And I've found some roundabout ways, and it seemed like in the beginning that it didn't all work together, but finding the fellowship and coming to Venice and moving to LA definitely showed me that it all did. And I am excited to have created this space where I reside in and can use it from college to now, and will continue to use it because I work in project management now, and it's good to know, the development side and how performers work and how to get projects off the ground and into construction. And so that is great. I also, will continue to do community engagement, community-led design, and participatory design, because that's how we need to think about architecture, right? Like, we can't continue to forget about the community that we are designing for. We don't live in these spaces. I tell our architects and I tell our, my staff all the time that we don't live in these communities, so we cannot speak for the people who do. So we need to listen to, what they want in their spaces. How do they exist already in the spaces that they occupy? And how can we relate that to, the built environment to create these beautiful spaces? Gentrification is a problem. It's an issue. It's a necessary evil. But we need to figure out how to combat the issues of displacement when we're trying to, grow these communities. The communities have to be involved. They have to speak for themselves. The community members do, and they have to have a voice in what we're placing in their communities and in the environment. So that's all I had. So yeah, anyone have any questions? We can start having conversations and whatever you want to talk about.
Hey, Dawn, thank you so much for such an inspiring depiction of your incredible life and career thus far, and how you're exemplifying in your work so many of the values that we share as a school. And I just wanted to, as folks are thinking of their questions, and I see Greg has a good question in the chat already, I wanted to introduce a couple of faculty members in the space in case you haven't met them. One is Nadia Anderson. She's the director of the City Building Lab and does a lot of work with community engagement and also affordable housing. And the other is Sekou. Yeah, and Sekou Cook is our newest faculty member and director of our urban design program. And his platform and research area is hip hop architecture.
Yes, it is. And we have, I think, been in similar spaces sometimes, but never really had conversations with each other. So it's great to see you on camera. And yes, I've been following, your work for a while. So great to see you.
Thank you. Nice meeting you. Yeah, I actually had a question or a few comments that I wanted to bring up. And I'm glad we have the chance to finally meet, because we're both in such a small community, and so we definitely have names that cross in common. And even in your Rose Fellowship, I'm good friends with Siboney Diaz Sanchez, who is also a current Rose Fellow or just finished her Rose Fellowship.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I had to double check in the appendix of my book that just to make sure that your thesis was listed, and it is. So thanks Craig Wilkins for letting me know about your work from 2010, so it could get included. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And anecdotally, I'm also starting a project right now where I'm dismantling a turntable. So. A digital turntable.
Please send photos. I would love to see that.
Yeah. But I'm glad you went back to the concept of didn't have a seat at the table, so we created our own, and wanted to interrogate a bit more what that means, because there's a part of this all that really struck me. Like, you kind of talked past it, but the idea that when you graduated, you didn't have a job and you're working in accounting, and you were trying to figure out all these different ways around and through to get some space within the architectural realm. And we're both familiar with Tiffany Hughes's work right now on the first 500, which is trying to finally get to 500 licensed Black female architects in this country, which is excuse my language, fucking insane. But the idea that design might be the answer to this division between who gets to be inside the Starbucks and who is hanging out outside the Starbucks, who is occupying the space inside of Google or Snapchat's headquarters, or who's actually on the streets, is a really powerful one, because my fear is that this type of work or this type of approach to architecture and design starts to relegate us into this space of these are the people who do the community engagement, but they don't really have the space or the expertise or we can't give them a seat at a table to actually engage in the actual design process. So, forgive me, but all of I know that project in Venice that's under construction now, Larry Scarpa came to Syracuse a year ago or a couple years ago to present that project. And it was fascinating, but he didn't talk, he didn't say anything about the community engagement process, right? Like, that's not at all in his sphere of importance. It's mostly about the design. We're designing this stuff for these low income residents, but where is the empowerment, not just of the residents, but of the actual voices of Black people in the design community, that aren't just the only people who are sensitive to the community engagement, but they actually have a completely different design vision that needs to be incorporated in this project, right?
Yeah, and I definitely agree. So I think I may have just mentioned a little about the history of Venice and the displacement that's there. And so, our goal is to make sure that those people have voices. And this is still a struggle, right? Because Venice is highly populated with very wealthy people. And so it's not that many Black people that still live there. And so that is a struggle for me, right? Because this is the type of work that I want to do to bring these folks back into the conversation, and they're just not there. And so that is a struggle for me. But being able to do so, I live in Inglewood, and being able to do that work in other neighborhoods is where I kind of helps a little bit. But Venice is its own space, and it's so difficult. And we're trying our best, but this is the reason why we're also looking at areas outside of Venice, like areas in Inglewood, because first of all, land is super expensive, and we can't find affordable places to even develop on. But also, too, because we want to be able to take these strategies out into other neighborhoods and spaces where these things are happening. So you're right that these voices are sometimes not included. There have been many events that we put on in Venice, and myself and my coworker were the only Black people there. It has happened. And so it is to Black people or persons of color, right? Any BIPOC community representation at these events. And that was hard for me. That was definitely hard for me. But figuring out ways to come outside of that realm and be in other spaces and to implement what I have done in other areas has helped that. And it is about bringing the people, bringing these folks, like their voices, right? Who can speak to their own experience in their lived spaces. And so that's what, I'm continuing to do. It is, the conversations with architects are still, a struggle because they do not talk about the community engagement. But my role, and with NOMA and even with VCH is about how do I have these conversations in these spaces? And NOMA, SoCal has been really good about bringing me into these conversations about development. and how my work as a developer needs to incorporate the architect, but how does the architect talk about community engagement and their role in community engagement? And also at the same time, Greg put in the chat, you know, do you build your own seat, your own table, or your own room? I think this is where I'm working towards, right, to build my own room. And maybe it's about me, you know, working as a consultant to in these spaces to architects to be able to have these conversations and make sure that they are discussing these things, you know, when they go out to speak to other communities. And I will say, Larry just did another talk at Cornell. I can't think of where it was recently. And he asked me to be a part of his video. And so I was really, yes, thank you. That's what I said. Way to go, Larry. This is what you need to do. I've had these conversations with him and Angie. And Angie would tell you, you know, I have become, you know, gotten to the point where I'm not afraid to speak up and say, listen, we have had this role. It's not just about design. We need to talk about the entire process. And he did, you know, ask me to talk about the community engagement and the role that BCH played, you know, because it's our building. So we need to be involved in that. But they've been great. It has been difficult with other architects, I'm not gonna lie. But I continue to want to take on that challenge, and I'm gonna continue to, you know, work through those issues. So yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you for that.
Dawn, if I could jump in,
Sure.
it's great to hear about your work. And if anybody out there doesn't know about the Rose Fellowship, it is incredibly prestigious, and it is like for like community engaged or public interest design, it's like the thing, right? For a way to get, and I'm constantly, I've had some students go into the Rose Fellowship, and some, you know, that it's always amazing. And God, I wish it had been around when I was a student, but and we need to be encouraging more of our students and alumni to apply, I think.
Yes, please.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, and at some point I'm going to have to like get your contact information because I've been doing, you know, affordable housing projects, and right now I have a studio working in Charleston, which is an interesting context. But what I'm wondering about right now, this morning the college has had a series of workshops on, you know, equity and diversity in education and pedagogy. And the one today, and I think there were a couple of people from architecture there, that was about sort of how do you address the issue, you know, white privilege and whiteness. And it was really interesting. So I'm wondering, from your perspective now, and thinking about when you were in school, and then, you know, what you might see now, because you're talking about some of the impediments in dealing with architecture and architects who are in, you know, in practice. And it sounds like your thesis was amazing. And I really am glad to hear about that. Some of my colleagues were able to help nurture that. But I'm wondering if there are things that you think should be part of the curriculum that maybe aren't, or that weren't when you were in school. And I have a lot of conversations with some of my students about this, so I'm curious to know what you think.
Wow, that is a loaded question. First, I do want to say about your studio, there is actually a current fellow that's in Asheville that you, I feel like you could also engage with, and that, you know, if you have need any ideas for studio work, he's working in Asheville, so it's really close to you all. If there are some things that that organization could discuss with you and talk to you about their affordable housing in Asheville. So I don't want to mention that. And definitely would love to talk to you more about your work in affordable housing. That's awesome. I think, yeah, we have these conversations a lot in NOMA because it was mentioned that there are less than 500 Black female architects licensed. And so it's it's loaded. It's a struggle. It's a struggle to get students in. It's a struggle to keep students. It's, the things that NOMA is doing for Project Pipeline to try and get students of color at a younger age interested. And so I think that's a good way for architecture schools to start, right? To be mentors, to come and talk to students about what is an architect, what do architects do, and it shows that that school is interested in having people of color, keeping people of color, and wanting to invest in people of color in this field, right? And so I think that's really where it starts. But in school, it is hard too, because we just lay it all out there. Architecture school is not set up for people of color. It's not, it's not a world that we are used to, or the setup of it, the work, the amount of work, long studio nights is just not, it's not easy for people of color to acclimate to that type of environment, especially when there's no one there that looks like them. And so I think UNC Charlotte has done a great job with diversifying staff, making sure that that all communities are represented. I actually started a grad program at another school and left because I couldn't do it. It was not diverse. My classes weren't diverse. The me trying to understand what architecture was, it just felt like they weren't interested in teaching me how to think that way. I mean, coming from an engineering major and also a HBCU, and moving into that world was a culture shock for me. And so when I got to UNC Charlotte, it was refreshing to see women. It was refreshing to see people of color. It was refreshing to know that my professors, even though I was different in my thinking, wanted to invest in what I was doing and the work that I was doing, and was interested in, moving me forward, regardless of race. All of my professors did that for me. And so I think, having professors who care, and also teaching architecture about people of color was missing for me. Having classes that, diverse classes on different types of architecture was missed. That was a part that was missing for me. So to be able to relate to what's being taught also helps to, to better understand what that looks like, and how, what that looks like out in the community, out in the real world, because the world is diverse. So, architecture school needs to be the same. So I think, I don't know, it is definitely a loaded question. But I will say my experience at UNC Charlotte was one of equality. And even though certain classes were missing, me learning about African architectures, what I wanted to research and do on my own. So those type of classes were missing, but the diversity was there, and the wanting to be diverse and to bring in a diverse group of students, I knew was there when I got to UNC Charlotte, and that's how I was able to thrive and have a successful thesis. Because who would say, yeah, go ahead and talk about hip hop and architecture, and not my professors at the school that I started were not into that at all. So yeah, I think it's a lot of conversations. Like we would definitely have to have more conversations about these things, but getting involved, talking to the anonymous chapters, in the area, and how they can be, involved with the students, and how professors can be involved in their work. Those type of things are really a great start.
I think you bring up some really great points. And, as you talk, I remember the things that you brought to your thesis project that I was not aware of, right? And I was not knowledgeable of. And it, as we move along as professors in a world that, has become sort of polarized, and people have knowledge and experiences, how do you think logically, and how do you apply methods and techniques, which I feel like is very much an important role for us as professors to help kind of formalize the way, people can quantify their experiences in a reasonable way to reveal new knowledge. And I think your thesis was one of those, and maybe Greg or Eric can chime in as well, because when you started studying those ciphers and trying to understand the space, taking apart, like, I don't know how many hours of YouTubes to try to figure out how people were acting and who the actors were in those kinds of spaces. I think that just the techniques and the methods were helpful for you, right? Even though the themes and the mentality of those groups were not really familiar to us, that you were able to explain that to us through your thesis because of those, those things that you took away from this place, right? So yes. I think that was really a nice collaborative learning experience for all of us, and maybe it helped formalize some of the ways that you conduct your community activities. That's really interesting to see that. I enjoyed seeing that.
Thank you. Yes, and definitely, and that's what I mean exactly, Peter, that by me, coming from an engineering background, like, things were so simple. Calculations are simple, for me, but understanding, those diagrams and the theories behind what I was researching came from you all, like, this is you all investing in wanting to learn more about the side of hip hop that I was researching, but also teaching me how to implement that into architecture. So yes, you all, Peter and Greg and Eric, I mean, the times to sit down and desk crits to better understand, I think Greg is the only one that's like seen me cry multiple times. It's like, I don't know what's happening. Don't know what I'm doing. But you all saying that you all seeing in that work what I didn't see, and teaching me how to see that. That is what I mean by, architecture schools have to have that, and have to have professors that want to invest in doing that type of work, and that type of giving that type of knowledge and collaborations with students when they don't have those skills. So I appreciate that.
We enjoyed it. I'm always looking for that similar relationship, because we take away a lot from it too. I know that I'm saying that, and we still have students who are on the road to graduation. So maybe that's an incentive. Are there any other questions? Anybody from, I was thinking Masay might have an interesting question because she's very interested in collaborative efforts. I had one more question. How do you manage architects from your point of view as a kind of go-between? Like, how do you, in a positive way, how do you bring them to the point of meeting the community and then absorbing their input, and at the same time allowing them, their kind of professional expertise also to play?
Yeah, you have to stroke a lot of egos when you talk to architects.
Yeah.
So, I definitely had to find a balance between, I'm not going to stroke your ego. This is not the time to do that. And, being polite about it. But the first thing is to make sure that the architects we hire align with our mission. We cannot hire anyone who does not want to dive more into diversity and equitable housing, want to dive more, into creative strategies for design of these developments. So that's the first thing, is to make sure that the work that they want to do with us aligns with our work and our mission. And then the second thing is just to sit down and have conversations about, my work and what we are trying to accomplish as VCH, as developers, and how we are not the same as market rate. This is not what we do. And, explain to them how we differ in that way. And so then it just becomes about building a relationship with them and a rapport, and to say, from the beginning, this is what we want you all to do. And if you are incapable of doing that, then we have to think about whether or not we're going to hire you, to do the work. And, in the beginning, it was really about hiring who we could, because a lot of architects don't have experience in affordable housing. And the way that, LA works is that we have to get points, our funding sources. So the architects have to have that experience. So that's also a challenge in who we hire. But I think the bottom line is about building relationships with them, and also letting them know that I have a background in architecture. So, I have a degree, I have a master's, and so I know what I'm talking about, and it's not just coming from, coming from left field, that I know this is the work that I've done, for years in research, and this is how it has to happen. And for the most part, it is worked out pretty well. It is difficult. There are a lot of LA high-end, architects that just want to do their own thing. And that just doesn't align with our work. And so there are a lot more out there that want to, just do great and feel good community work. So yeah.
Pretty good. There's just one I just want to mention, and then we'll close the session. But Daniela Hardin was asking, she's a native of LA, about how to get more involved, and maybe it's possible that I can, if Daniela, if you could send myself an email, if you know my address, but I can put you in touch with Dawn. Maybe you guys can have a discussion. I'll
actually put my email in there for everyone.
Okay, very good. Yeah, why don't you do that?
Oops.
Danielle, hopefully that would be good.
Yeah, so for anyone who wants to reach out, have any questions after this, please feel free to email me, and have more conversations.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Chris Jarrett says, go, go, go. And he can't
Thanks,
wait till
Chris.
the next 10 years. So
I appreciate that, Chris. Thank you so much. It's been a long time. I think since I've seen you. So it's great to see you. Thank you for joining. Thank you for that compliment. I also saw Emily. Emily was on earlier. She sent me a message. So want to recognize her as well. She's where I started my research on African architecture. So in her class. So great to see her.
very good. Dawn, this has been wonderful. Thank you very much for
Thank
sharing.
you.
And we'll stay in touch, okay?
Yes, thank you all so much. Again, I really appreciate this opportunity to do this, to talk about my work. And this is exciting that you all do this. And I'm honored to be a part of this series and lecture, and great to see everyone.
Very good. Thank you. Good luck in your future work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks everybody for coming.